The term unwanted was written across her forehead in bold, charcoal black script, brutish and harsh against the pallor of her skin. Her hair was shaved clean, as if she were a prisoner awaiting the gallows. As Thaddeus Whitmore spurred his horse to a stop, the dust swirled around the hooves like smoke. He blinked at what he saw, amazed by something more dire than anything he'd seen during 2 decades of exploring the frontier. The girl appeared no older than 16. She sat motionless beside a dry creek bed, her spine against the dead trunk of a cottonwood tree. Her dress was ripped in multiple areas, stained with dried blood across her shoulders. But it wasn't the wounds or the grime that caused Thod's chest to tighten. It was her eyes, hollow, vacant, as if whatever life once dwelled behind them had already given up. He slid off his horse slowly, his boots crunching through the dry dirt. Every fiber of him cried out to leave. A branded girl equaled trouble, and trouble was something a man like Thad couldn't do without, not with the history he had. But there was something about the way she sat there, so battered, yet somehow recognizable, that rang a note he hadn't heard in years. She shifted her head fractionally as he came to her, her cracked and bleeding lips. When she moved her mouth to speak, her voice barely exceeded a whisper. "Please, stop hurting me." The words struck Thad like a blow to the stomach. He had witnessed brutality before, but this was different. This was destruction tailored by purpose, meant to remove all hint of a man's dignity. He hunched beside her, not wanting to get too close, but close enough to witness new cuts on her arms. "Who did this to you?" he demanded. "The entire town," she whispered, almost inaudible. They said I brought the devil with me." A shiver ran up Thad's spine. He'd read of towns destroyed by hysteria, turning against themselves when crops withered or disease struck. But to inscribe a word in a girl's face, to mark her like an animal, that was something worse. For the first time, her gaze came to rest on him, and a glimmer of hope shimmered in her eyes, faint but certain. "Are you gonna take me back to them?" Before Thad could speak, the thunder of galloping hooves resounded through the canyon. A cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Several riders, blistering speed, intent. The girl winced, wedging herself deeper against the tree. "They're coming," she stammered, fear carved across her face. "They said, if someone helped me, they'd hang them too." Thad looked up at the approaching riders, then again at the girl. Clemency, she'd named herself. The word unwanted still taunted him from her forehead. His hand fell to his gun, but he knew fleeing was the intelligent thing to do. But as the hooves grew louder and the girl shook beside him, Thad understood, somewhere deep within himself, that the next choice he made would change everything. 6 riders rode out of the dust, grim-faced under wide-brimmed hats. Leading the group was a man who wore a sheriff's badge, but the glint in his eyes had nothing to do with upholding the law. "Well, well," sneered the sheriff, reining his horse 20 feet away. "Looks like our little witch got herself a hero." Thod remained on one knee, using his body to block the girl. "She's just a child, Sheriff. Whatever occurred, this is not justice." The sheriff spat on the ground, his hand roving to his holster. 3 dead children from fever, crops ruined in the field, and then she appears with books written full of devil signs. "You believe that's coincidental?" Clemency whined and wrapped herself more strongly around the tree. "I never harmed anyone," she replied, her voice shaking. "I just wanted to read. My grandmother showed me from her herb books." A rider leaned forward, half his face obscured by scarring from old burns. "Curses and spells written in those herb books, girl. We know what you etched behind the church." Thad's thoughts were racing. Fear could drive people to do awful things, but this was not blind terror. This was planned. He waved at the scar on her head. "So you marked her because—" "Why?" The town became frightened. Sheriff Baxter offered a cold, wry smile. Town voted. Everyone agreed. She's not wanted, by God nor by man. Any man who aids her suffers as she does. The warning seemed to linger in the air like the smoke from a burning pyre. Thad looked into the men's faces, half rage, half expectation. They craved combat. I'm just passing through, he said carefully. Found her here, gave her some water. That's it. Baxter nodded. Then ride on. Forget her. Let the desert take what it will. But Thad looked down at Clemency and saw something fierce beneath the fear. A flicker of resistance. It reminded him of himself. That same stubborn fire that had kept him alive through years of exile. What if I don't? Thad said, the words out before he could catch them. The rider's hand fell to his pistol. Then you get to enjoy her blessing, stranger. And believe me, nobody's coming to rescue either of you out here. Clemency's grip on his arm was like a vice. Please, just leave. I ain't worth dying for. But Thad was already recalling the rope burns concealed under his bandana, the town that attempted to hang him for a crime that he did not do, the silence of individuals too afraid to speak. Then Clemency's body went rigid alongside him. Oh, no, she whispered, looking horrified. They brought the preacher. Thad tracked her stare. A seventh rider materialized, cloaked in black, the very epitome of the Reaper himself. Riding fast, bearing something that reflected red in the sunlight. A branding iron. Preacher Morai Kane resembled death with a Bible wrapped around him, his black cloak with its train behind him. Thought you might want this, Sheriff, he shouted suavely, just in case our friend here gets generous. The wind bore the smell of hot metal, and Thad's belly lurched. Clemency tightened her grip on his arm. That's what they employed, she said. Mrs. Henderson gave me bread. They seared a cross onto her cheek. Tommy Morrison told me I wasn't evil. They branded his shoulder. Thad felt something cold settle within him. This was not fear anymore. This was power, control, and it was clothed in holy speech and iron instruments. Sheriff Baxter rode down slowly on purpose. Last chance, stranger. Ride out, or join our congregation. The riders fan out, shaping a half circle, cutting off every exit. 7 guns, one against them. You know what the real sin is? Thad rose to his feet, cracking knees. It ain't readin' books or plantin' herbs. It's big men allowin' fear to make 'em into monsters. Preacher Kane laughed. Talk like a genuine heretic. Tell me, how long since you've been inside a church? Thad winced. Memories surfaced. Of Sunday mornings. Of a girl named Martha. Of a mob and a noose. He'd attempted to guard her once. They hanged her anyway. Faith, Thad said, ain't about structures. And it damn sure ain't about torturing children. This child, the preacher spat, brought death. She spreads evil. The Lord demands justice. Clemency stood on trembling legs. All I ever did was try to heal people with herbs. You were too afraid to know, so you labeled it evil. Silence. Baxter slapped her across the face, and she crashed back against the tree. Something cracked within Thad. Something that had remained bottled up for 2 long, bitter years. But before he could act, Preacher Kane moved forward, the hot metal held out to him. Your turn to decide, he said. Demonstrate your faith. Mark her yourself, or be marked with her. Thad could sense the warmth of the iron against his cheek, but fear gave way to something deeper. Rage, regret, memory. He thought of Martha again, her body hanging, her offense, collecting herbs under the light of the moon. Preacher Kane leaned in close, voice low and venomous. You've seen this before, haven't you? You know how this ends. Thad's hand was inches from his gun, but he wasn't the man who fled anymore. Not this time. Just leave, Clemency whispered, her voice tenuous to the edge of disintegration. I know. No one should have to die for me. But as she finished speaking, something on the ground next to her caught Thad's attention. Barely legible marks drawn into the parched earth at the edge of her hand. Not curses, not signs of the occult. Letters, words, help me. Not evil, Mama, Papa, dead. It struck Thad like a blow from a hammer. She wasn't a witch. She wasn't a monster. She was a child, alone, orphaned, struggling to learn to read with her deceased grandmother's books. And the town had made their fear into cruelty, labeling her as the source of all that had failed. Sheriff Baxter took another step closer, his voice falling to a frigid growl. "Time's up, stranger. Make your choice." Thad glanced around him, into the faces of men corrupted by righteousness and drenched in terror, men who'd experienced the taste of judgment and craved it again. He saw Martha once more, swaying from a tree while her assassins bowed their heads for Sunday blessing. He envisioned 20 years of fleeing, of never standing upright for any other man. And then he gazed down at Clemency, her tiny fingers still inscribed in the ground, spelling hope with shaky hands. "Okay," Thad said softly. He picked up the branding iron. The look of relief was instantaneous. The preacher grinned smugly as he passed over the hot metal. It was heavier than Thad anticipated, its warmth coming through the leather handle. Clemency shut her eyes, crying silently. "Thank you for trying," she breathed. But Thad didn't approach her. He whirled with sudden velocity and slammed the branding iron into Preacher Cain's gun hand. The preacher shrieked through the canyon as flesh crackled and the gun fell to the ground. He stumbled, holding the smoldering wreck of his hand. "Should 'a' kept better company, preacher," Thad grumbled as he discarded the iron and drew his Colt in a single motion. The 6 men hesitated, hands frozen near their holsters. Thad's revolver was already aimed at Baxter's chest. "Here's how this is going to work," Thad said, his voice like thunder before a storm. "You're going to get back on your horses. You're going to ride out of here, and you're going to leave this girl alone." But he knew it wasn't finished. He saw it in their faces. The thirst for blood hadn't disappeared. Baxter's eyes grew cold. "You just made the biggest mistake you ever made. 1 gun to 6. You think that's gonna work out good for you?" "Perhaps not," Thad shot back, as calm as a summer breeze. "But I promise you won't get the chance." One of the riders started creeping towards his pistol, and then, out of nowhere, Clemency spoke. "His name is Thaddeus Whitmore," she said. "He used to be a lawman in Kansas, until they tried to hang him for protecting a girl, just like me." Thad's blood turned cold. How could she know that name? That truth? Sheriff Baxter's face lit up with cruel recognition. "Whitmore, I've heard of you. Deputy turned traitor, sided with a witch, killed 3 men trying to escape the rope." "4, Thad reminded him, "and they weren't my people anymore." The words lingered in the air, weighing as judgment. Now they realized precisely who they were dealing with. A man who'd already gone over the edge, a man who had nothing to lose anymore. So what would you do, were you Thaddeus Whitmore? Attempt to reason with a crowd who'd already reached a verdict? Or fight even at the cost of death? Tell me in the comments, because what Thad did next would determine whether either of them lived through the day. Preacher Cain gasped and stumbled to his feet, burned hand clutched to his chest. "He's a murderer, a heretic," he spat. "Just like the girl. God has given them over to us." Thad didn't flinch. "Odd thing about God's judgment," he said, adjusting his aim. "It tends to come from the most unexpected source." That's when they heard it. Hooves. Quick, from the north. Another group of riders riding hard and fast. Sheriff Baxter's face wavered. "You expecting company?" Thad asked, but Clemency responded first. "The circuit judge. He was going to ride through Millfield today to resolve land claims." Baxter paled. A federal judge meant questions, authority, trouble. "We end this now," one of the riders growled, reaching for his gun, "before anyone starts nosing around." Thod saw their minds as clear as day. Kill him and clemency now, claim self-defense, clean up before the judge showed up. But when the riders topped the ridge, Thad's heart fell. They weren't lawmen. They were just like the others, grinless and angry, and leading them was a woman whose face was etched with anger. "That's her," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Clemency. "That's the devil's child who murdered my baby." Thad knew her at once. Constance Millfield, wife of the founder of the town. Her 6-month-old daughter had been one of the first to die of the fever. Now she'd brought them all with her, armed, frenzied, hungry for vengeance. She was 6 months old. Constance wept, sliding off her horse with fury in each pace. Healthy, until she brought her accursed books. The mob behind her surged forward, sorrow and rage in their eyes. These weren't angry citizens now. They were parents who had buried kids, families torn apart by grief. And they wanted someone to blame. Thod stepped back against the dead cottonwood. Clemency hung on his side as almost 20 armed townsfolk ringed them. His one revolver was a joke against this sort of mob. "Oh, please," Clemency wailed, her voice cracking. "I never did anything to hurt anyone. I was just trying to help, making fever medicine like my grandmama taught me." "Liar," Constance screamed. "We saw the symbols behind the church. You were invoking demons." "They were letters," Clemency wept. "I was writing letters, trying to remember how to make willow bark tea." Thod's heart shattered. She was trying to save them, and they couldn't look beyond their sorrow. Baxter advanced, the man giving in to courage. "See now? A murderer and her guardian, both spreading filth." A voice boomed from the crowd. "I know him." Thod turned to see a grizzled rancher motioning toward him. "That's Thaddeus Whitmore. Used to wear a badge, murdered honest men over another witch." The atmosphere changed. Hands crept toward holsters. The crowd was seconds from chaos. "There's something you all need to know," Thad yelled over the storm, his voice rising, "before you go shedding more blood for the sake of justice." Slowly, he patted inside his coat, cautiously, extracting a folded bit of paper he'd carried for 2 decades. "This girl," he held aloft, "isn't the first innocent you've accused, and she won't be the last." Constance shrieked, "What are you lying about?" Thod unfolded the paper, an official survey, sealed and signed. "I'm talking about the real reason your children are dying, your crops failing, your animals sick." Baxter's face drained of color. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Thod held the paper high. "These are mining reports. Surveys that show mercury runoff, leaking into your water supply for 6 months. The gunshot cracked like thunder. Thod reeled as the bullet ripped through his shoulder, whipping him back into the dust. The report fell from his fingers. Baxter's gun puffed in his hand, eyes open and unfocused. Blood welled up under Thod, but he clung to consciousness. Then Clemency sprang forward, grabbing the papers before the wind could sweep them away. "Mercury poisoning," she shouted, reading the first sentence through tears. "That's what's killing your children." A youth voice sliced through the dazed silence like a cut. "Blackstone Mining Company. Upstream processing operation. Mercury levels fatal to children and pregnant women." Clemency's tone was crisp, shaking, but unmistakable. The crowd halted, murmurs withered, and the flame of righteous indignation started to falter into something else. Recognition. Constance Millfield, who had just demanded Clemency's killing, stood in appalled silence. What is it saying?" she breathed. The hands of Clemency were trembling while she read out the next line. "It means the fever that killed your babies wasn't natural. Somebody's been poisoning your water for months. Thod, his shoulder pumping blood, dragged himself up, holding his good hand over the gash. Pain screamed through him, but change in the crowd was indubitable. The tempest of retribution was brewing. Doubt had insinuated. "That's impossible," Sheriff Baxter growled. But his voice had all the believability of a leaf. "The mining company adheres to territorial guidelines." "Do they?" Thod ground through pain. "When did you last check their website? When did you last ride out there and observe what they're dumping?" A woman emerged from the crowd, Mrs. Henderson, the one who carried a scar for sharing bread with Clemency. The cross on her cheek remained bright red. "My husband's employed at the mine," she spoke quietly. "He informed me they've been dumping barrels into the creek at night, mentioned he was afraid, but the foreman instructed him to keep quiet or get fired." The others chimed in. "My cattle died shortly after they increased the operation," reported one. "Our well water's been tasting metallic for weeks," another chipped in. Baxter's face shone with sweat now. His hand trembled on his pistol. "You're all letting a murderer poison your minds. That girl's a witch. And he's protecting her because he's part of her evil." But Clemency kept reading, her voice rising with every word. "Sheriff Baxter receives $40 a month from Blackstone Mining Company for regulatory compliance and community relations." Gasps washed over the crowd. Every eye turned to Baxter, and in them, Thod saw not rage, betrayal. "You knew," Constance whispered. "You knew why our children were dying, and you let us blame her." "It wasn't like that," Baxter wailed, panic creeping into his voice. "They said the chemicals were safe." "They told you whatever you wanted to hear," Thod said icily, "while you tortured an innocent girl to cover your tracks." Preacher Kane lurched forward, continuing to clutch his burned hand. "Don't be deceived. She still has evil in her. God's wrath will follow." "No," Clemency said, holding the book that began it all up. She opened its weathered pages, showing sketches of herbs and meticulous descriptions. "These aren't spells, they're recipes, cures. My grandmother was a healer. Willow bark for the fever, echinacea for infection, sage for the belly." The scarred rider who had once called for her death now moved towards his horse. "Perhaps we were in too much of a hurry." But it was much too late. The folks of Millfield turned, not in anger, but in the silent rage of the betrayed. Sheriff Baxter stood alone now, and then there was the sound of hooves again. This time it was true. Not revenge, justice. Territorial Judge Harrison Caldwell rode into the canyon like the hand of law itself. He surveyed the scene, a man wounded, a girl with "unwanted" sliced into her forehead, and a sheriff with a smoking gun hovering over both. "What in God's name is going on here?" the judge thundered. The people parted before him in stunned silence. Sheriff Baxter attempted to put away his gun, but the judge's gaze fixed him where he stood. "Sheriff," the judge stated, voice as cold as steel, "why are you standing over a man who's bleeding? And why is the child obviously the victim of torture?" "Judge, I can explain. The man's a murderer. The girl is a victim," the judge interrupted, kneeling next to Clemency. His expression hardened as he viewed the etched word. "Who did this?" Constance moved forward, her face filled with shame. "We all did. We believed she brought the sickness." The judge stood, scanning the papers Clemency presented to him slowly. His jaw tightened as he read. "Blackstone Mining," he said finally, low and dark. "I shut down their Colorado operation last year for the same reason. Mercury. It killed 16 kids there, too." And then he fixed Baxter with a direct stare. "How much did they pay you to look the other way?" Baxter's voice broke. "I thought they told me the amounts were safe." "Safe?" the judge blustered. "You accepted blood money while kids were dying." Kane tried again. You don't understand, Judge. That girl. I understand perfectly, Caldwell said, cutting him off cold. The only evil here is men who carved pain into a child's flesh to hide their guilt. Thawed swayed, still standing. Judge, he rasped, check the records. I'll bet this isn't Baxter's first time taking payoffs. The judge nodded. I mean to verify everything, and anyone who hurt this girl will be brought to justice. Those who want to make things right, come forward. Witness. Mrs. Henderson came forward first. I will. Slowly, one by one, others emerged. Sheriff Baxter, in despair, grabbed his gun one last time. 3 townspeople tackled him before he even cleared leather. The judge calmly put him under arrest. What about the girl? Constance asked, her own voice shattered. How do we put this to rights? Judge Caldwell regarded Clemency, who still clutched her grandmother's book against her chest. There's an orphanage school in Denver. She can learn there properly. Reading, medicine, a new beginning. Clemency nodded, saying nothing but firm. I'd like that. And for the first time, her voice contained something no one had ever heard before. Hope. As the sun fell beneath the rim of the canyon, Thad could feel the old sting to ride out before anyone could demand answers about his past. But Judge Caldwell was not done. Mr. Whitmore, the judge called, I recall your case. What happened to you in Kansas? Wasn't justice. That was a lynch mob. Perhaps it's time that you ceased running. We need men who'll stand up for the innocent. Thad gazed at Clemency, at the glint in her eyes that had never been there, and understood something. Some battles are worth the scars. 6 months passed, and Deputy U.S. Marshal Thaddeus Whitmore got a letter. Clemency Rose was literate and teaching other kids her grandmother's healing methods. The scar above her eyebrow had lessened, but more significantly, the term unwanted had been replaced with a stronger one. Purpose. Sheriff Baxter now spent 20 years in territorial prison. Blackston Mining Company was closed for good, and the children of Millfield. They were healthy once more, drinking clean water, growing up in a town finally free from fear and guilt. Because sometimes justice is late, but when it arrives, at last, it heals even the most grievous wounds. Now tap on the video on the screen. Because the next story, it has something you can't define, only feel, and when it does, you won't be the same.